There is an ending to Descent 2, and it leads directly into the third, but I will probably do another video on Descent 3 as this script has already gotten longer than anything else I have created. Descent 3 is a very interesting and different game.
If you couldn't guess by that opening, today I'm looking at the third and final installment of the Descent series. So without further ado, let's prepare for Descent. Unlike the first two games, Descent 3 has a pretty beefy story. It's a direct sequel to Descent 2, which was a sequel to Descent 1, so it follows the narrative of Dravis absolutely screwing over Vertigo 1. The last cutscene in the second game shows Dravis screaming at the unresponsive Vertigo 1, drifting through space in his Pyro GX. The cause of this was the prototype warp core that gets installed during the first cutscene of Descent 2. The intro of Descent 3 continues off this. We see his ship getting closer and closer to the surface of the sun. He is then saved by tractor beams before he reaches the surface, and then is taken from his ship and taken to safety. So who took him up, you might ask? The Red Acropolis research team. As Vertigo 1 is healing from his acute radiation exposure, the director of Red Acropolis, Caitlin Harper, speaks to him. They overheard his last transmissions to Valhalla Tower, which is why Red Acropolis was able to save him. Caitlin continues saying that they've been keeping an eye on Post-Terran after one of her acquaintances, Jerry, a researcher, was killed by a robot. Caitlin tried to contact the PTMC, but they claimed that they'd never heard of him. She also tried to contact the CED, but they didn't want to get involved with Post-Terran either. We also learned why the warp core malfunctioned. She goes on to say that PTMC has been testing and modifying the virus. They also tried to overload his warp core in an attempt to kill him, but that didn't go as planned. Catherine asks for Vertigo 1's help to investigate, and he obliges after hearing that he'll get a new ship and everyone's favorite companion, Guidebot. One thing to note is that a huge majority of the story is told through text, so it's very similar to the opening to Descent 1. Not everyone will be a fan of this, but then again, the story isn't crucial to the gameplay. I'm going to leave it at that because not only is there a lot to the story, but I also don't want to spoil it. With the story out of the way, let's get into the gameplay. On the surface, it might sound like Descent 3 is a short game with only 15 levels and 2 secret levels, but believe me, it's not. The levels are a lot longer than the ones that could be seen in Descent 1 or 2. It's most likely that way because the developers wanted to intertwine the story into each level. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I'm pretty sure Overload, another 6DoF game, does this as well. I wish I could tell you exactly how long it took me to complete it on my first try, but I kind of calculated it to be around 9.4 hours, which is 3 hours longer than Descent 1 or 2. But the length really depends on playstyle and skill level, but just keep in mind that it is longer than previous games in the series. Descent 3 still has the same 5 difficulty levels, but with the wider arsenal and new types of robots, I'm led to believe that the difficulty kind of varies. I feel like some levels were harder than others, and at one point, I'm pretty sure I had to look up a walkthrough to complete a part of the game. I also famously said that Descent 3's Helion Assault Mech was the hardest FPS boss I ever had to face, and there is some truth to that statement, but after playing the game for a second time, not only to get the background footage, but also to remember what I thought was good and what wasn't, I realized that beating it is a lot easier than I remembered. The enemy AI has had a major upgrade from the first title as well. The enemies now follow you around a lot more aggressively, and they dodge your attacks more often. They also shoot a lot faster on harder difficulties, but if you played either one of the first two games, you would have known that. But if you're new to the series and decide to play the last game first, or really any of the games, enemies are a lot harder to deal with on harder difficulties. For my second playthrough, I decided to play on Rookie, which is what you've been seeing throughout this entire video. Speaking of enemies, a lot of them are just really annoying to deal with. One of my least favorite to deal with are the robots that are tiny and move fast, and then there's the flamethrower robot, but here's why. The other robots are standard, nothing too crazy besides the ground tank-esque robots, but they're easy to deal with. On the topic of firepower, some of the primaries and secondaries from Descent 2 have been replaced by completely new weapons. The new weapons are the Mass Driver, a railgun which doubles as a sniper, the Napalm Cannon, a glorified flamethrower, the EMD gun, a weapon similar to the Plasma Cannon, the Microwave Cannon, which is basically just the default laser, the Frag Missile, which is basically a shrapnel bomb, the Impact Mortar, a drifting grenade, the Napalm Rocket, which sounds pretty self-explanatory, the Cyclone Missile, which when deployed splits into 5 other missiles, and finally, the Black Shark, which can be summed up to be a black hole generator. There are a few other new countermeasures, but I'll spare you the details because I think you already get the point. With the new weapons, you should be able to kick robot ass a lot easier than before. But if you're still getting your ass kicked by robots, There's really no penalty for dying in this game, as the life system has been completely wiped. It's a lot easier when dying isn't a setback. Like I said earlier, Descent 3 is a longer game, so some of the levels are more complex than others. They all kind of have their own niche things going on for them. Unlike the first two games, Descent 3 isn't limited to just the inside of mines. We are now allowed to see more complex geometry because Descent 3 isn't based off cubes. We now get to see the surfaces of planets and moons, which was impossible to do before. Many of the levels in Descent 3 take place in research stations, and some take place on space vessels. Due to this vastness and complexity, the wireframe automap has been removed, but it has been replaced by a much better 3D map. Each room is colored so that you can position yourself and know your surroundings, unlike in Descent 2 or Descent 1. Descent 3 throws away the objective of finding the blue key, then the yellow key, then the red key, then blowing up the reactor. Like I said earlier, Descent 3 follows a story more than it has in the previous games, and the collect keys objective didn't really seem to fit the new formula that the developers were trying to go for. So instead of collecting keys, what the hell are you supposed to be doing? The short answer is fighting against the PTMC. The longer answer really depends on what level you're playing. For example, in Level 2, Novak Corporate Prison, your primary objective is to break Dr. Schweitzer out of prison, but on a completely different level, you are killing 4 robot leaders. Then on another one, you're protecting a spaceship. It's interesting to say the least, but there are a few segments of levels that really just infuriate me, some more than others. One of the worst offenders is the start to Level 4, which is PTMC corporate headquarters. And I have no clue why the designers thought that traveling through not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 train tunnels where you have to dodge oncoming trains was a good idea. It's not, because the pacing is completely killed. The level would have been better if either that segment was cut shorter or it was just completely removed. The second offender is in one specific level, but I honestly can't remember which one it is. But my issue with this one level is that you have to use guided missiles to actuate a lever, and it doesn't sound like a bad idea, but what if you run out of those guided missiles? It makes no sense why you would add a feature where you have to use a limited resource to do some menial task. There is another level that uses this concept. It's the start to Level 12, but at this point you should have enough weapon energy where there shouldn't be a problem. You have to bounce your shots off a force field to escape from a trap, but the catch is you can't see what you're trying to destroy. There is another level where you have to do puzzles. To progress at a certain point in Level 6, you have to solve a maze through trial and error, and this isn't the worst thing that the game has thrown at the player, but it's a bit tedious to have to fail and try again over and over. The soundtrack for Descent 3 is composed very well, but I have no clue what genre it's trying to be. Either I'm being stupid or it's just some random jumble of different styles of music. The soundtrack honestly isn't the worst thing I've heard. I'm a big fan of Level 3's music and Secret Level 1's music. Also, just like with the last game, the robots each have their own call sounds, so as I said previously, you can know what you're facing well before you even see it. There isn't a whole lot to talk about when it comes to sound design for this game besides the fact that it was just well done. Now, this isn't an issue with the game itself, it's a matter of trying to run an ancient game on modern hardware. I had such an awful time trying to set the game up so that it would just work as it should, messing around with the settings just to get mouse look to work properly, trying to get the textures to even display, the mouse look jittering or even stuttering. Now, I did find a workaround for that, however, it's not without its flaws. There are tools online, and I believe on Steam as well, to help solve any issues that may arise during your gameplay, but once it works, you shouldn't have to mess with anything. With all that in mind, is Descent 3 really worth it? This one is a tough choice. I understand that it's quite dated and the graphics aren't inherently the best. But if you ignore that, the gameplay still holds up today. In a sense, it's similar to Half-Life, but it's actually fun. Truths aside, if you are a fan of Descent 1 and 2, I think you should purchase it. It's only $10 on Steam, and it does go on sale from time to time. Plus, if you felt that the original games were a bit short and lacking, the third installment might be the best option for you, as it also has an expansion similar to Descent 2. But if all else fails, I suggest you take a look at Overlord by Revival Productions. It's basically the fourth installment in the Descent series, but it's not official, of course. I highly recommend it. It's just as fun as the originals, if not more. And with that said, I hope you enjoyed my look on the interesting and different game called Descent 3. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have fun preparing for Descent.